May 25th, 1979, seemed like an ordinary morning in Manhattan until a 6-year-old boy named Etan Patz walked out of his home for the very first time alone and was never seen again. In just 15 minutes, a peaceful New York neighborhood turned into the center of a national mystery as a smiling, curious child with a blue cap and $1 in his pocket vanished without a trace. His disappearance sparked one of the biggest searches in American history. His face became the first ever on a milk carton, and what was uncovered decades later shocked the entire country. This is the chilling case that forever changed the way we protect our children, and it all began with a simple walk to the bus stop. Etan Patz was born on October 9th, 1972, in Manhattan, New York City. He was the first son of Stanley and Julie Patz, a young couple raising their children in the growing arts district of Soho. At the time, Soho wasn't filled with high-end stores and tourists like today. It was a quiet, somewhat gritty neighborhood full of old buildings, artists' lofts, and local families who knew each other. The Patz family lived in a modest second-floor loft apartment on Prince Street. Stanley worked as a photographer. Julie stayed home, taking care of the kids and running a small daycare out of their home. Etan was one of 3 children. He had a younger brother and sister, and he was the kind of child who stood out, not because he was loud, but because he was curious, bright, and always full of questions. He had big, warm brown eyes, light brown hair, and a smile that people remembered. He loved drawing, especially spaceships and animals. He was small for his age, but independent. He liked doing things on his own, like helping carry groceries or setting up his school bag without help. His parents said he wanted to grow up fast. He had a sense of responsibility most kids his age didn't show. Family life in the Patz home was calm and loving. Julie was cautious but trusting. She walked Etan to the bus stop every day, even though it was only 2 blocks away. But Etan had been asking her for weeks to let him go by himself. He had seen older kids doing it, and he wanted to feel like one of them. Each time, Julie said no. But on the morning of May 25th, 1979, she changed her mind. It wasn't a careless decision. Julie looked out the window and watched him all the way down the street. She made sure he had everything. His lunch money, $1, tucked into his pocket, his backpack, and his blue cap. Etan was excited. It was a big moment for him. That small bit of freedom meant everything. It was also the day his school had planned a little party. He didn't want to be late. The Patz family had no reason to expect anything bad would happen. Their neighborhood felt familiar. It felt safe. Neighbors greeted each other. Shopkeepers knew the kids who walked past every day, and the bus stop on West Broadway was just around the corner. That stretch of Soho was part of Etan's world. He had walked it with his mom many times before. He knew the route, and he knew the rules. Don't talk to strangers. Look both ways. Stay near the bus stop. But on that morning, something changed. Etan never reached the bus. He never arrived at school. And that safe little world he knew so well suddenly became a place full of questions. Questions that would haunt his family, his neighborhood, and an entire country for decades. Before May 25th, 1979, Etan Patz was just another child growing up in New York. But by the end of that day, his name would become part of a national conversation. And it all started with a simple, ordinary decision. A 6-year-old boy walking to the bus stop, alone, for the very first time. The day before Etan disappeared, everything seemed normal. He had gone to school, come home, and talked excitedly about the party happening in class the next day. His mom said he was looking forward to it. He had even picked out a favorite outfit, a blue denim jacket, blue pants, and his black backpack. Nothing seemed off. No one in the family noticed anything unusual, but there were quiet details that didn't get attention at the time. Details that, later on, would make people wonder if something had already been going wrong in the background. In those weeks leading up to May 25th, some neighbors remembered seeing a young man standing near the bus stop on several mornings. He worked at a nearby bodega just 1 block away and often watched the children walking past. His name wouldn't become important until many years later, but even then, His presence didn't raise alarms. He was quiet, didn't interact much, and looked like he belonged in the neighborhood. Etan, being friendly and open, wouldn't have thought twice about passing by someone familiar. He was taught not to talk to strangers, but like many kids, seeing the same face over and over can start to feel safe, even if it shouldn't. Julie Patz later shared that Etan had been asking more and more to walk by himself. He had seen other kids do it and wanted to prove he could too. He told his parents he was ready, and because the bus stop was so close, his mom finally said yes. No one could have guessed that such a small decision, one made by almost every parent at some point, would change their lives forever. On the morning of May 25th, 1979, the day started calmly. It was sunny and warm, with the promise of summer in the air. Etan left at 8 a.m., and Julie stood at the window, watching him as he walked down Prince Street, his small frame moving confidently toward West Broadway. He was supposed to meet the school bus at the corner, just 2 blocks away, but at some point along the way, Etan vanished. When the school day ended and Etan didn't return home, his parents became worried. Julie called the school and was shocked to hear that Etan hadn't been there at all, not even for the class party. That's when panic set in. Stanley Patz grabbed his coat and went out looking for his son. He searched every corner of Soho. He asked store owners, cab drivers, construction workers, anyone who might have seen a little boy in a blue cap with a backpack. No one had. The police were called that evening. At first, some officers thought Etan might have simply wandered off. Maybe he had gotten distracted or missed the bus. But that theory didn't sit right with Julie and Stanley. Etan was careful. He had practiced the walk many times. He knew his stop, and most of all, he wouldn't run away. The investigation began quickly. Flyers were printed overnight with Etan's face and description. Neighbors joined the search. Helicopters were called in. Officers knocked on doors across the neighborhood, but there were no clear signs, no items left behind, no strange cars reported, no witnesses with a strong lead. Still, there were subtle things. A worker at a nearby building thought he saw a boy talking to a man at the corner that morning, but he couldn't remember details. Another woman said she'd seen a boy walking alone past her window, but she wasn't sure what time. These hints were small and vague, but to detectives, they were all they had. It didn't take long for the name Jose Antonio Ramos to come up. He was a drifter with a history of troubling behavior around children. He had once been close to a woman who used to babysit Etan. That connection caught attention, and over time, suspicions grew. But in 1979, there was no proof. Ramos denied involvement, and Etan was still missing. The pressure on police and the Patz family was crushing. They weren't just dealing with a mystery, they were dealing with silence. Total silence. No calls, no notes, no signs of struggle, no demands. Just an empty space where a little boy should have been. By the end of that first week, the mood in Soho had shifted. Parents began walking their kids to school again. Strangers were no longer waved at, and the Patz family, once just another neighbor, became a symbol of something everyone feared, that even in broad daylight, even in your own neighborhood, things could go terribly wrong. May 25th, 1979, the turning point, the day everything fell apart for the Patz family. That morning, Etan left home just after 8 a.m. The plan was simple. He would walk 2 blocks to West Broadway, catch the school bus, go to class, and come home like always. But when 3 p.m. came and went, and Etan didn't walk through the door, his mother Julie knew something was wrong. At first, she tried to stay calm. She called the school. The teacher answered and said something that made her stomach drop. Etan wasn't here today. Julie's voice shook as she repeated the question. He didn't come to class. The answer was the same. Within minutes, she was calling neighbors, asking if anyone had seen him. Stanley left work early, rushed home, and began searching the streets. By early evening, the Patz family had called the police. That night, patrol cars rolled slowly through Soho, shining spotlights down alleyways and stairwells. Police officers went door to door. Flyers were made, showing Etan's school photo and what he had been wearing. Blue pants, a striped shirt, a blue cap, $1 in his pocket, a black backpack on his shoulders. The hours ticked by. No one had seen him get on the bus. No one had seen him near the stop. No one reported a struggle, or a scream, or even something unusual. He had simply vanished. At first, the police thought it might be a case of a child wandering off. Maybe he got lost. Maybe he skipped school. But Etan had never done that before. He was a careful, rule-following kid. He didn't wander. He didn't get distracted. Then came the questions. Was there a family argument? Did he run away? But there were no signs of problems at home. No fights. No pressure. Just a normal family, trying to give their son a little more independence. As the night dragged into morning, the search grew larger. More officers were brought in. Helicopters searched from above. Police dogs sniffed for clues. Dozens of volunteers joined the effort. They checked basements, rooftops, back alleys, even sewers, but nothing turned up. The media caught wind of the story. News crews gathered outside the Patz home. Reporters described it as one of the biggest child searches in New York's history. Etan's face was everywhere, on lampposts, store windows, newspapers. But as days turned to weeks, the reality became harder to face. There were no solid leads, no ransom notes, no suspects arrested, no one confessed. It was like the boy had walked into thin air. The Patz family never gave up. Julie and Stanley kept talking to the press. They handed out flyers in different states. They wrote letters. Stanley even printed Etan's photo himself and mailed it to hundreds of places. That photo, a little boy with a gap in his teeth and a hopeful smile, would soon appear in a way no one had seen before. Months later, Etan's face became the first missing child image printed on a milk carton. It was a new idea, and it caught national attention. Suddenly, parents across America were seeing Etan's face at breakfast, and with it, a growing fear. If this could happen in New York, it could happen anywhere. Behind the scenes, the police looked into dozens of tips. Psychics called in. Strangers claimed they saw Etan in other states. None of it led anywhere. But one name kept coming up: Jose Antonio Ramos. He had been linked to a former babysitter of Etan's. He had a disturbing past. When police questioned him, he made a strange admission. He said he was 90% sure he had been with a boy he believed was Etan that day, but he changed his story multiple times. There was no physical proof, no witnesses, nothing that could hold up in court. So the case stalled. The days kept passing. The flyers started to fade. And for the Patz family, every day without answers became its own kind of pain. That moment, the decision to let Etan walk alone, became a wound they carried for the rest of their lives. It was a simple act of trust that ended in silence. But this wasn't the end of the story. It would take over 3 decades before the truth began to surface. From a place no one had expected, for over 3 decades, the truth stayed buried in silence. The years passed, but the case of Etan Patz never truly went away. His photo remained in newspapers and on bulletin boards long after most cases faded. His parents, Stanley and Julie, refused to give up. They kept the same phone number, just in case he ever called. They kept his bedroom mostly untouched. His drawings were still pinned to the wall. A tiny coat still hung on a hook by the door. And yet, no real answers came. For years, the main suspect remained Jose Antonio Ramos. He was in and out of custody on unrelated charges. At one point, he even sent a letter to a friend, writing that he was sure the boy he had taken was Etan Patz. But in court, nothing stuck. The leads were weak, and by the early 2000s, it seemed like the case might never be solved. Then in 2012, everything changed. A new district attorney in Manhattan, Cyrus Vance Jr., reopened the case. He believed there were still questions worth asking, and maybe someone out there still had something to say. That March, investigators received a tip about a basement on Prince Street, the very same street where Etan had lived. It was just down the block from his family's apartment. The building had once housed a small shop, and the basement had never been fully searched. With new equipment and a fresh team, the FBI and NYPD began digging. They brought in cadaver dogs, ground-penetrating radar, and forensic experts. For days, cameras circled the block. News trucks returned to Soho like it was 1979 all over again. People held their breath. The digging continued for a full week. Investigators pulled out soil, wood, and debris. They found stains that looked suspicious. Samples were tested, but in the end, there was no body, no remains, no conclusive evidence. Still, something about the search brought the case back into focus, and someone, watching from afar, seemed shaken. Just 2 weeks later, on May 24, 2012, one day before the 33rd anniversary of Etan's disappearance, a man stepped forward with a confession. His name was Pedro Hernandez. He had worked at a bodega on West Broadway in 1979, just steps from where Etan had walked that morning. He was 51 years old now and living in New Jersey. Out of nowhere, he told church members and later the police that he had done something terrible, that he had hurt a little boy. Detectives were stunned. Pedro claimed he had lured Etan into the basement of the bodega with the promise of a soda. Once inside, he panicked. He said he did something he couldn't undo. He wrapped the child in a bag and placed the body in a box. Then, according to him, he left it on the curb, mixed with the building's trash. He claimed he had kept it secret all these years, told no one, except a few family members and his pastor. When police asked why he was confessing now, he simply said, "I couldn't keep it inside anymore." But something didn't feel right. Pedro Hernandez had never been a suspect before. There was no evidence tying him to Etan, and he had a long history of mental illness, including hallucinations. His memory of events was vague and changed with each telling. He said he thought it was Etan, but he wasn't sure. Still, the police believed there was enough to move forward, and the Patz family, they wanted answers, even if they were late, even if they were incomplete. In 2015, the case went to trial. The courtroom was packed. Etan's parents sat just feet from the man now claiming to have taken their son, but the jury couldn't agree. After 18 days of deliberation, it ended in a hung jury. The following year, the case was tried again. This time, in 2017, 38 years after Etan's disappearance, Pedro Hernandez was found guilty of kidnapping and endangering the welfare of a child. He was sentenced to 25 years to life. Even then, some questioned the verdict. There was no DNA, no witnesses, no physical evidence, just a confession and the weight of a story that had lasted nearly 4 decades. For the Patz family, it wasn't the ending they had imagined. No closure, no remains to lay to rest, but it was something. Stanley Patz spoke to reporters after the sentencing. His voice was steady. "It's a long time to wait for justice," he said, "but we are grateful that someone is finally being held accountable. Etan was never found, but now at least the silence had a name." After the trial ended in 2017 and Pedro Hernandez was finally sentenced, there was a sense of relief, but it wasn't peace. For Stanley and Julie Patz, it had been 38 years of waiting, nearly 4 decades of wondering what happened to their little boy. They had lived through years of false leads, broken promises, and painful silence. Now, at last, someone had been held responsible, but there were still questions that would never be answered. Where was Etan's body? Was the confession completely true? Could they ever fully know? And yet, through all of it, Etan's name had already made history. Long before the courtroom victory, his disappearance had changed America. In the early 1980s, when there were no national systems for tracking missing children, the Patz family pushed for change. They worked with law enforcement. They spoke to the press. They kept Etan's case alive, not just for themselves, but for the hundreds of other families facing the same nightmare. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan declared May 25th, the day Etan vanished, as National Missing Children's Day. That wasn't just symbolic. It marked the beginning of new laws, new databases, and a public that became more aware of the dangers facing children in everyday situations. Etan's photo was the first to appear on a milk carton, starting a movement that would spread across the country. In the years that followed, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children was created. The Amber Alert system was developed, and local police departments began taking child disappearances more seriously from the very first hour. Etan's case had reminded everyone that even in a quiet neighborhood, even in daylight, things could go wrong, and children needed better protection. For the Patz family, those changes didn't bring Etan back, but they brought meaning to the loss. In interviews, Stanley Patz often said he didn't want people to remember just the tragedy. He wanted them to remember the little boy behind it. Etan was more than a face on a flyer. He was a curious, creative 6-year-old who loved animals, drawing, and exploring the world around him. He had dreams, just like any child, and those dreams were taken away before they had a chance to grow. After the trial, Stanley and Julie kept their lives quiet. They never moved from their apartment on Prince Street. They lived every day in the same place Etan had once called home. And though they rarely spoke to the media after the sentencing, those who knew them said they carried themselves with strength and grace. Etan's story continues to echo through time. His case is taught in law schools, studied in criminal justice courses, and remembered by parents across generations, not because of how it ended, but because of how it changed the way we think about safety, trust, and the value of a child's life. Some stories are hard to tell. This one is even harder to forget. Etan Patz may be gone, but his name still stands for something. A reminder, a warning, and a call to never look away when a child goes missing, because every child deserves to be found, and every parent deserves to know